So it's really truncated into two categories: workers who are other than senior executives, and we'll get into the definitions of who they are, and senior executives. So in that first bucket, the ban prohibits employers from entering into or attempting to enter into a non-compete, enforcing or attempting to enforce non-compete clauses, and also a requirement to notify workers who are subject to a non-compete clause. And Danielle's going to talk about that a little bit later in the presentation and also go over what the content of the notice should look like. So with respect to the other bucket, for senior executives, the ban would prohibit them from entering into a non-compete clause after the effective date. So there is a little bit of a grace period between now and September 4th, assuming that that date continues to hold. So broadly speaking, who's covered? And effectively, we're talking about most private for-profit businesses, which is clearly inclusive of the laboratory industry. There are some exceptions, which are outlined on the right: public entities, not-for-profit entities that meet certain definitions, and other industries that were carved out from the FTC rule. But generally, those are not going to be of major concern for our purposes here. So let's talk about the key definitions that are embedded in this rule. Not a surprise, they're broad. They're intended to encapsulate the entire rule, and they work together. So the first one we want to talk about is a business entity. And what does that mean? It's a partnership, it's a corporation, it's an LLC, it's a division, it's a subsidiary. Effectively, it's almost every type of business entity and organization that you could think of. What's a non-compete clause? It's a term or condition that prohibits a worker or penalizes that worker or functions to prevent that worker from essentially accepting a position elsewhere. Again, very broad. The next definition, which is important insofar as a later definition for senior executives, is policymaking position. And that means a company's president, its CEO, or any other officer who has policy-making authority within that enterprise. Just really a couple more key definitions. Policy-making authority is the authority to make policy decisions that control significant aspects of the business entity or the enterprise. And an officer is a president, vice president, secretary, financial officer, controller, or other folks who are performing similar business functions. So now we get to that kind of second bucket definition. We were talking before about workers who are not senior executives, and then we're going to talk a little bit about who senior executives are. And the definition was kind of crafted to tilt towards more highly compensated individuals who perform decision-making functions, but query whether that number that you see there, is really a meaningful demarcation in our current economic climate. So a senior executive is a worker who's in a policy-making position who received annual compensation of at least $151,164. And you can see that those definitions also relate back to the ones that we just covered a minute ago.